OK, it's a sensitive situation. Let's discuss this now with two guests. First of all, I'm joined by Toni Bugle. She's the founder of the Mothers Against Radical Islam and Sharia, and also by activist and comedian Kate Smurthwaite. Ladies, welcome to you both. If I could just ask you first, Kate, to what extent do you consider this an invasion of the privacy of these young girls if they're stopped at airports and there's some kind of examination, whether it's verbal or possibly physical, to see if they've been subjected to mutilation?
Well, you know, first of all, I should say that, you know, you might imagine, I'm completely against FGM. I think that we have to do a great deal more to combat it. But for me, there's an issue with this idea of stopping people at airports and having these compulsory examinations. And the issue is simply that a compulsory medical examination is a violation of your human rights. You know, smear tests save lives, but I don't expect to be forced to have one if I choose not to. It's a basic thing, and it's very difficult to teach young women that they should have the right to have control over their own bodies if at the same time we're forcing them to undergo a procedure they don't want. Now, you know, I absolutely think there is a lot more we can be doing. I think we should be very, very clear and educating people that this is a crime. We should be doing more to act when we see evidence of it. We should be doing more to make sure that prosecutions happen and that prosecutions are then widely publicised, to make sure that other people thinking about this are aware that they will be tracked down and that they will be stopped and that the punishments will be severe. But for me, it seems obvious that we can't solve one human rights violation by bringing in another. There are a lot of options out there and a lot of stuff we could be doing that we're not doing right now. So my feeling is that this is a silly suggestion. We need to look at what we can do within the bounds of people's human rights and do that stuff. So much more we could do in terms of education and also in terms of prosecuting. Right now in the UK and right around Europe and stuff, the levels of prosecution are really low and lots of cases being you know, mooted and brought forward, but not being put right the way through the court process, and we can obviously do a lot better with that.
OK, let's bring in Toni. How do you feel about what Kate said there? She feels that if it's compulsory, a physical check, that's too much. Do you agree or not?
I actually think that we need compulsory checks. I also think that if we're talking about children, I mean, you have to remember sometimes these are newborn babies that are taken out on holidays and now being mutilated whilst in another country. What about the human rights of those children? Do we not owe it to them to take in their human rights? If you're going to talk about human rights issues, let's look at the children's human rights. Surely we have a duty, and if it's a doctor or a specialist, you can sit there and say women choose to have a smear test. We still have to prep our girls ready to be able to go and have that done comfortably and feel comfortable with the trust of a nurse and a doctor, be it a female or a male. So I really think that if we're going to look at the terms of human rights and the protection, I think protection comes first, above and beyond people being offended or people saying it goes against my human rights. I actually think these children have a right to human rights, and therefore we have a duty to make it compulsory. And I think that maybe not in the airport. I mean, maybe you have to compulsory book a doctor's appointment with your doctors to check that that child is intact before leaving the country. And again, checked when she comes back. That should be compulsory. And that's no different to me than taking your children to the doctors, or if there's been a report of child abuse and they have to go and look at that child's body all over. I fail to see the difference. If we want to protect human rights, we have to protect the children who don't have a voice. Those children don't get their human rights protected. So I'm not quite sure how you will go about protecting those vulnerable children, Kate. So I would like to throw it over to you and say, well, if you say no to compulsory checks, and I get it, in the airport, maybe not the best place. If it's done in a medical profession, within making an appointment to book before you are taking your children out on so-called holidays that are nothing more than a butch fest to butcher a child, surely how else would you go about protecting those children who don't have a voice? So I'm really curious as to how else what would you actually physically put in place? And I actually don't think compulsory is a bad thing. I don't.
Well, the first thing that we have to do, I mean, it's a perfectly legitimate question, Tony, because I totally agree that we have to do something and that not enough is being done. It's a huge issue, it's an incredibly serious issue, and I do feel like because it's something that affects girls rather than boys, it gets kind of put on the back burner when it's a super, super serious issue and it needs addressing now. The first thing that needs to happen is education. The first thing that needs to happen is we need to be talking about it, and we need to be talking about it to young people. And yes, you know, it's a serious subject to talk to young people about, but obviously it's much, much better to be talking to somebody about it than it is to be forcing them to undergo a medical examination that they don't want. Talking to them about it, explaining what it is, and I think actually it's important to talk to all young people.
You're talking about young people who are able to vocalise something to you, Kate. You're talking about vocalising something to people, right? So what about the 6-month-old baby that gets taken abroad and is female genital mutilated?
In that situation, Tony, then we need to be talking to the parents, don't we? We need to be making it clear to the parents that their children will not be subjected to this.
The parents believe this is a cultural acceptability.
We also know that there are lots of young women in our society who have undergone FGM, who are angry about it, and we're not doing enough to prosecute their parents. And I think it's quite obvious that if we start taking those prosecutions forward and we start seeing convictions and we start seeing that happening, we're going to see other people, you know, who perhaps previously thought it was a good idea, deciding, hold on a minute, if we go ahead with this, in the long run, we are going to be tracked down, we are going to end up in court. And I think it's clear to me that that's the best way to go about it, and I also think that until we're doing that...
We had 3 dentists in the UK that were exposed for attempting to carry out female genital mutilation. There was no prosecutions brought against them. Now, the problem you've got here is all well and good you saying that we... And I agree with you, Kate. On that, I agree with you. But what I don't agree with is when I had my kids, it was compulsory to take your child to see the health visitor. It was compulsory. You had to do it. You wasn't no ins, ifs or not buts. And that health visitor would come in and would examine my child. It wasn't an issue. Now, what we need is the same thing. And when you're talking about young people, educating young people that female genital mutilation is not acceptable, I agree. Education's key. But we're talking about young babies who don't have that. So for those babies, do you not think, for those babies who do not have a voice, that a compulsory check is not such a bad idea?
But interestingly, you talk about how health visitors will go and visit every single child. And, you know, one thing that we could be doing in this country and a lot of countries that we're not doing is making sure that health visitors are educated about FGM and are actually able to ask those questions and to make sure about what's going on. Because to me, when it's part of a broad health check that, you know, that is being carried out on all children so that they're not being selected on the basis of background or ethnicity or all of those kind of creepy things that make the situation so much worse, I think it's super important that health visitors, along with, you know, asking questions about diet and play and all the important things that health visitors do, they should also be asking questions about the parents' attitude to these things, and they should be looking out for, you know, the warning signs, and they should be looking out for this kind of stuff, and they should be making sure that parents are aware that if they do these things, there will be consequences. Well, the warning signs are quite... Well, let me finish and answer you, Tony. The first warning sign is quite obviously that the parents don't think that this is a terrible idea, or the parents are unaware of what the issues are, and that means they're then at risk of other relatives stepping in. What's that? Sorry, say hey?
But you can't read, right, you said warning signs, so you want health visitors to know these warning signs, and the warning sign you just gave me is whether these parents think this is acceptable. Well, that's not a warning sign, that's something inside that person's head. A health visitor can't see inside a person's head. So what are the warning signs that you're talking about? There is no actual warning sign. A health visitor can
ask a lot of questions about what's going on. A health visitor can ask parents about their attitude to these things. Well, I mean, sure, of course that's the case, but it's also, there's lots and lots of steps that we can do. We can make sure that health visitors warn parents that this is going to lead to prosecution.
Unfortunately, we're about to lose the signal with both of you. I mean, it's obvious that we've just touched the tip of the iceberg here. It's a fascinating conversation. We could have easily rattled on for another 20, 30 minutes. I wish we had the time. Unfortunately, not on this occasion, but it was very interesting to hear both of your thoughts. I appreciate your time. Toni Bugle, founder of the Mothers Against Radical Islam, and comedian and activist Kate Smurthwaite. Thanks, ladies.
Thank you.
And that wraps